Welcome to Broken Trust Stories. If you love crazy, unbelievable stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Let's jump right into today's story. Hidden camera reveals my wife's secret affair, the shocking twist you won't believe. On the morning of the test, I felt quite sanguine. I was 99.9% convinced that it had, indeed, all been a joke. All that was needed was a clear report from the lie detector test, and I would welcome Flo home with a certainty that after the scare my reaction to their latest joke had given her, I would never again be the butt of any stupid pranks. That warm glow lasted until the phone rang at a little after 10. It was Alice. "Jim, it's Alice. I found something you really need to see. Roger is at the testing center. Can you come over straight away?" The tone of her voice didn't bode well, so I headed next door with speed. As was our custom, I walked straight in the front door and heard Alice yell that she was in the study. I walked in to see her sitting at the desktop computer, a worried look on her face. "Jim, I want you to see something." I pulled a chair up. "Jim, Roger has been acting a little secretive since Tuesday. A couple of times I've passed the door here and he's hurriedly minimized something. He's also taken to leaving the room when he's on the phone sometimes. Yesterday, I'm pretty sure he was on the phone to Flo. Just now was the first chance I've had to look at our computer without him in the house." With that, Alice clicked on the Google icon at the bottom of the screen. The application opened. "I don't know if Roger realizes that unless you delete them, all Google searches are saved. This is a history of his searches since Tuesday." My blood ran cold as I read some of what had been researched. There were 4 different variants along the theme of how to fool a lie detector test Alice, and I sat side by side and over the next 30 minutes read many of the pages Alice's husband had been perusing. When we'd read enough, we retired to her lounge room and discussed what we thought it all meant. We were still talking when we heard Roger's car pull up outside. Soon the front door opened and the man himself walked in. He eyed me warily, mumbled a greeting, then walked to the couch opposite Alice and I before sitting down. If I hadn't been looking for it, I might have missed the slight limp as he favored his left foot. That was the only answer I needed. "Rog, I presume you will pass the test with flying colors. Truth be told, I was pretty much convinced nothing had happened that day anyway." I saw Alice giving me a bewildered look out of the corner of my eye. Roger had returned before I'd had a chance to tell her my plan. "If you're willing to swear that you and Flo will never pull another stunt as long as you live, I'm willing to come over there and shake your hand to put it all behind us. Shucks, I probably won't even bother reading the report." A look of immense relief suffused his face, and he readily gave me his word that he was a reformed man. Smiling, I stood and moved toward him. He slowly rose to meet me. Extending my right hand, I took an extra step and stood firmly on his right foot. A move like that should have resulted in slight discomfort. Instead, the blood drained from his face before he uttered a blood-curdling scream while throwing his body back onto the couch. Desperately, he used both hands to remove his foot from under mine before ripping his shoe off. Alice and I watched as the shoe finally came off. We could see blood dripping from his thin sock. He was still groaning quite satisfactorily. A sideways glance at Alice told me she was confused about the blood. I continued to watch her face, smiling when I saw the penny drop and she made the connection between what we'd read earlier and the wound in Roger's foot. "I won't bother reading the report because I know it will be a load of crap. Did that nail you drove through your shoe hurt when you pressed down on it when answering their control questions in order to elevate your baseline results? It had to, didn't it? Make yourself sweat. Increase your pulse rate through the harmless questions, so when you told your porkies the results wouldn't stand out as lies." The pain on Roger's face eased a little, to be replaced by a look of desperation as he glanced from me to Alice. "Yes, I did cheat, And I told Flo how to as well. But not for the reason you think, man. Really? Listen up, Alice, this should be good. Alice and I sat back down as Roger gingerly applied pressure to his soul to staunch the bleeding. I looked at Alice to see her scowling at the mess he was making on the floor. I thought about suggesting to her that he be made to clean up the carpet with his tongue. To give him his due, Roger didn't seem to be thinking what to say to spin this new development. Finally, we didn't know what questions you'd given the guy. What's so complicated about have you two make out? I interrupted. Yes, I know we would have both passed that one with flying colors, but we were worried you'd slip in something more subtle. Like, well, has our behavior always been such that it would pass the spouse test? At this point, Alice butted in angrily. And the answer to that one was obviously a big fat no. Why else would you go to the trouble of sticking a damn nail in your shoe before the test? I'm guessing that the fact you came over with the nail still in means you forgot to take spare shoes or a set of pliers. You never were much good at thinking ahead, were you? Please, honey, I didn't want to lose you, and Flo certainly didn't want to lose Jim. So, my darling husband, when and what did you do that wouldn't pass the spouse test? Roger squirmed in his seat and replied in a very small voice. That was the day. We wanted to just pretend we were doing something upstairs. I lay on my back and Flo straddled me. We were both fully dressed, you understand, he hastily added. We were bouncing up and down until the bed creaked, and I don't even remember who started it, but somehow I was rubbing her under her skirt. Ashim, we both really enjoyed it. We were so stupid. I was a little confused. I'm not a bad judge of character, and this smacked of truthfulness. If it wasn't, then Roger was extremely good at coming up with excuses on the fly. I looked over at Alice. Is that good enough for you? No, not by a long shot. The pair of them have proven they're such consummate liars and schemers that I'm nowhere near satisfied. Roger, put some antiseptic on your foot, bandage it, then I think you'd better leave. I have some thinking to do, not to mention another fine mess of yours to clean up. Alice snapped, indicating the stain on the carpet by Roger's foot. If Roger wasn't a fantastic actor, then the look of terror on his face showed he was worried beyond belief about the future of his marriage. He blurted out, I have a video. Alice's, what came out almost simultaneously to my, what video we sounded like a sick version of two people singing in harmony. I set up a video camera in our bedroom before we handcuffed you in the basement. I filmed the whole thing. I beat Alice to the punch. Then why the hell didn't you say that days ago? Roger didn't have to answer that one. If the video showed them jerking each other off, even fully clothed, it wasn't what two spouses desperate to reconcile with their partners would want made public. I, for one, firmly believe that the boundary of infidelity falls way short of actual penetrative love. Any form of intimacy, even a kiss on the lips, would be a crossing of the line. I wanted to, but Flo thought you'd go ballistic. We told Roger to clean his foot up, then grab the video. While he was out of the room, I sent Flo a text. I couldn't resist putting a nail in her coffin of fear. Pull the nail out of your shoe and come over to Alice's house. Roger is going to show us the video. Now, it's normally about a 1-minute walk from Mary's place to ours, but it was a good 35 before there was a knock on the door. Alice opened it and ushered in Flo and her sister Mary. Flo's makeup was ruined and her eyes red-rimmed. Mary explained that my wife was panic-stricken once she read my text and realized I was onto the nail game. Flo looked nowhere near as relaxed about the test results as Roger had been when he first came home. Mary merely looked at me and raised her eyebrows at Flo's further self-destructive behavior. Flo tried for a hug, but I steered her to sit on the couch beside me. She kept glancing at my face, I suppose for a clue as to how I was feeling. I wondered if Mary had any inkling as to what was on the video. Alice and I hadn't been idle for the 35 minutes. Our conversation had revolved around what we'd likely do if the video turned out to show exactly what Roger said it did. Alice had already decided she would probably forgive Roger for letting the situation in the bedroom get out of hand after letting him stew for a while, that is. I was more ambivalent. My emotional reflex was that my wife had cheated on me, which I'd always sworn was unforgivable. My logic circuits were calmer, though. Flo had been an exemplary wife for 24 years, and our children had already made it known they'd be devastated if I didn't forgive her. Within a minute of everyone getting settled, Roger appeared with his laptop. There was a USB thumb drive sticking out of one of the ports and a cable from another. He set the computer next to the TV and plugged it in. I thought it odd that he didn't just stick the thumb drive in the TV, but then remembered Alice telling me he wasn't that tech-savvy. Once the image on the computer screen was matched on the TV, Roger mumbled another apology and pressed play. Flo was looking away from everyone else in the room and the TV. She knew my stance on fidelity, and this had to be a horribly embarrassing situation for her. Mary was looking attentively at the screen, as if she had no idea what was coming. Roger was looking more relaxed again. He seated himself beside Alice and tried to grab her hand, but she pulled it away. The clip only went for about 10 minutes and pretty much showed what Roger had already described. It was almost completely non-romantic. Within a few seconds of it starting, both protagonists appeared, fully clothed as Roger had said. Flo pushed him onto his back, then straddled him, back to the camera and mouthing the lines that were etched in my soul, word for word. We saw that it was Roger who'd initiated the hand play, but he only beat Flo by seconds. I found it very hard to watch, for several reasons. Firstly, because no man with any self-esteem and outside the sicko cuckold set wants to watch his wife with another guy in that situation. Second, it triggered an ugly post-traumatic episode for me, as I once again heard the words that had so devastated me less than a week ago. It made my wrists burn and throb in memory of my helplessness to prevent what was happening in the room above me. About halfway through, I ended up closing my eyes and trying to block out the noise. I didn't open my eyes again until the hush that followed their mutual climaxes filled the room. Never had a silence felt so loud and pervasive. Judging by everyone in the room's stillness, not even the normal sounds of breathing could be heard. I wasn't alone in my feelings. I watched the screen, seeing Flo and Roger separate very quickly before leaving the camera view. The video stopped, showing an empty bed. The complete silence in the room lasted for several uncomfortable seconds after the clip ended. Mary eyed Flo disgustedly. Roger looked to Alice hopefully. Flo was focused on a spot on the floor in the corner. The silence was broken by Alice jumping to her feet, quickly followed by Roger. "You lousy, stinking, cheating lady." The words from the diminutive nurse were shocking. The worst I'd ever heard her utter in the past was damn or bloody. It certainly shocked Roger if the expression on his face was anything to go by. The crack as her open hand hit his cheek was like a gunshot. Foam was frothing from her mouth. I can honestly say I'd never seen someone that angry. "But honey." "Don't you honey me, you conniving little scumbag." Roger ducked and thus avoided a second slap landing. He grimaced as he put weight on his right foot. He looked confused. That whole video was a crock of shit. But why? We invited Jim and Flo over in the late afternoon, didn't we? We were going to sit outside on the patio, weren't we? "Don't you remember?" dear Alice asked, though it sounded more like a snarl. But we decided to have it indoors because it pissed down with rain all afternoon. Remember now? Roger still looked confused but nodded assent to what Alice was saying. Furiously, Alice pointed at the TV screen. Look at that, you dumb scumbag. There's sunlight streaming in the window. Not only was this filmed on a sunny day, but in the morning. That window loses the direct sun before noon. You fabricated the whole freaking thing, didn't you? Roger's face lost its confused look and took on one of terror. It was all the admission of guilt I needed. The sudden mental swing from considering forgiveness to implacable resolution was embarrassing, and I hate being embarrassed. I could, and in fact, did accept there may have been a valid reason to cheat on the lie detector test. There was only one reason they'd fake the video. The next few seconds were very busy. Flo let out a loud moan and bolted out the front door. Mary just sat there stunned. Alice advanced on Roger, who tried to get past me to use me as a shield. I took one step and brought my foot down on his injured one with all my might. Instinctively, he doubled over. As his head attained the near horizontal, it met my knee going the other way. His head snapped up again, blood spraying from a flattened nose. He joined Flo in headlong flight away from the house. The three of us remaining were locked in a gruesome tableau. Alice stood, shaking and with tears rolling down her face. I knew exactly how she felt. For the second time in a week, the person who I'd loved unconditionally for nearly a quarter of a century had ripped my heart to shreds. That it was the same person who had raised my hopes in between episodes was doubly stunning. Mary continued to sit and stare at the TV screen, stunned, I suppose, by her sister's stupidity. And if I was any judge, horrified by the lies she'd no doubt been told over the last week by Flo. I walked over to Alice and took her in my arms. I held her while she trembled uncontrollably over the death of her marriage. Me. I'd always preferred to mourn in private. I would do it later. In the here and now, I was coldly, clinically calm, as I get in a crisis, and was already starting to assemble a list of questions and avenues of investigation. And I was already starting to regret letting Roger get away with only a broken nose. I glanced at Mary, wondering why she remained. Was it to apologize for her part in all this once we were settled down? Was it being unable to drag her gaze away from observing the train wreck right in front of her? Or was it to wait until we were calmer to once again intercede on her sister's behalf? With no way of answering that without breaking contact with Alice, and with no intention of doing that, I let my mind do a high-speed drift. That Roger was quite clever, manipulative, and a good actor were all now apparent. Although not as clever as Alice, it seemed. If she hadn't spotted the sunlight clue, we would even now probably both still be part of two successful couples. In hindsight, the remade video was inspired. I still had trouble reconciling it with being a fake. I would stake my life on the soundtrack being true to the words with which I'd been subjected to over that weekend. The inevitable logical conclusion that certainty led to fitted exactly into the same shaped slot in my mind like the second last piece of a jigsaw. Either they dubbed an old soundtrack onto new visual footage or copied the words and sounds manually. Both scenarios were predicated on them having recorded their actions during the original episode. Suddenly, Roger playing the file via his laptop made sense. With a final hug, I lowered Alice to the couch and walked to the laptop. Thank Christ it hadn't gone into hibernation yet, which would have required a password to regain access. Stupid, I thought to myself. If it had, I could have just looked at the thumb drive on another device. Clearly, my brain was also addled by all that had happened. With fingers dancing over the mouse pad, I closed the video playback software to be presented by an Explorer screen that told us we'd just been watching me and Flo take 8. There were files marked takes 2 to 7 as well. Standing out from the others like dog's balls were 2 other files. One called me and Flo Original, the other Basement. I double-clicked the latter, then slid along the progress bar to approximately 3/4 of the way along. There I was, suspended from that bar in the damned cellar again, filmed by an obviously hidden camera. I closed the clip. Too many bad memories. The one marked original was a much larger file than the subsequent ones. After glancing at Alice and getting her nod of approval, I clicked on that one. It opened with a view of Roger and Alice's bedroom. The view was different to take 8 and caused me to sprint down the hall to that room to compare the two views. A half-minute's detective work led me to the conclusion that the original camera had probably been hidden on a bookshelf, while the subsequent versions were most likely taken from a tripod-mounted camera at the foot of the bed. When I returned to the lounge, the little counter at the bottom of the screen showed 1:05, with over an hour to go. Roger obviously didn't know how to edit either. I skipped to 20 minutes before the end, then advanced in 30-second intervals until the action started. Going back a half minute, I sat on the couch next to Alice and grasped her hand for support, as much for me as for her. Let's just say that the original version was very different to the subsequent ones. About the only thing they had in common was it started with Flo pushing Roger onto his back. About 25 seconds in, I heard Alice and Mary gasp in unison. Because of the angle the video was being shot from, it showed Flo's face as she turned her head sideways and looked down and to the left of the camera. In other words, toward the grill at floor level that opened into the duct that transmitted the sounds their joke relied on, to the basement below. The basement where I was held prisoner. The expression on Flo's face, the one that prompted the two ladies to gasp, was sickening. My wife fully knew what was going through my mind in the basement that night, and loved it. My own ever-so-loving wife was getting off on mentally torturing me. I fought the strong urge to retch. When the on-screen Roger saw where Flo's gaze was concentrated, he grinned evilly. Too shocked to check the timing, but it must have been seconds later, we all watched as Roger rolled Flo onto her back. As he knelt beside her, fumbling with his belt and trousers, the Flo on the screen hiked up her skirt and ripped her own panties off, throwing them towards the unseen grill. The rest of the video played out pretty much how I'd imagined things while being restrained in the basement. Roger pounding away and Flo thrusting her hips up to meet him. Yes, her orgasm had been very real and unbelievably quick. With the wisdom of hindsight, I think it was Flo's cruel enjoyment of the situation that encouraged Roger and spurred the subsequent sequence of events. Having said that, if I was a betting man, I would have put money on this being the first time for Roger and Flo, and the video certainly showed that what had started as a relatively innocent situation had quickly spiraled out of control. I was pretty sure that Roger knew he got off on watching another's humiliation, but it was probable that Flo stumbled upon her kink on that day. After the show was over, Mary asked me if there was a future for Flo and me. I could tell from her demeanor that she wasn't optimistic. I paused for at least a minute to examine my feelings. No, I'm afraid not, Mary. Ironically, if Flo had come to me afterwards and said that it had all started as a prank, but it had gotten out of hand, which is what it looked like in the original video, then maybe I would have considered forgiving her. But no. She and Shithead conspired to fake a story and cheat the lie detector test. That is a level of deception that I didn't think she was anywhere near capable of. Makes me wonder how well I know her. What else has she deceived me about? Besides, we haven't seen all the practice videos yet. After her original faux pas, she went back and had intimate physical contact with Roger at least once more. How many times did they make each other come during those practices? Then there was that look she had on her face. I know you saw it too, after experiencing a high like that. Would she ever truly be satisfied with typical romantic interaction with me ever again? I'm sorry, Mary, but we're over. Mary nodded gloomily. Please don't destroy her publicly, Jim. That would only end up humiliating your kids. If you give me a copy of the videos, I'll explain it quietly to Mom and Dad, Flo, and even your kids if necessary. I nodded and thanked her. She left sadly, but with a determined look on her face. Alice already had the phone book open at the legal section. Epilogue. Epilogue. Alice and I consoled each other for a few weeks. However, it was clear that any sort of relationship was doomed from bad memories, and we parted as friends. I was leaving her house late one night, after I'd consoled the shit out of her yet again, when I was confronted by an irate Roger in her front yard. How could he and Alice ever hope to reconcile if I was tomcatting with her 5 times a week? What a delusional pissant. After glancing around to spot potential witnesses, I had the greatest of pleasure breaking his nose again. I was quite proud of myself for not killing him. The memory of that sadistic grin on his face, just before he ended my marriage, would have been provocation enough. Alice ended up pretty much crucifying him in the divorce. When he claimed his share of the assets, she, with my complete blessing, threatened to get me to have him charged with unlawful restraint, using the video of me in the cellar as evidence. He cut his losses and disappeared shortly after that. Just as well. I was probably bluffing. I might have been able to shrug off the public humiliation of myself, and I didn't give too much of a shit about Flo's image, but I didn't want to embarrass my children or Flo's extended family. Shortly after I'd rebroken Shithead's nose, a week or so after the video session above, I received a text from Flo wondering if the fact I'd not released the clip to her children, family, and friends meant she and I had a chance in the future. The fact she referred to only the one clip clued me in that she didn't know I'd seen the original. She probably assumed Roger wouldn't have been so stupid as to leave all the clips on the one stick. The text also reminded me I hadn't sent them to Mary. I hadn't heard from my children in that week, but with the self-centeredness of young people, was that unexpected? It also implied that Mary and Flo weren't communicating, possibly because Mary was pissed off, or possibly because Flo was too embarrassed. I rang Mary to confirm she was still okay to act as the video liaison she was. It was during the same conversation I discovered Flo had moved back in with her parents. As I was copying Take 8 as well as the original to a DVD, I remembered I hadn't actually watched Takes 2 to 7. I did so, though. Between them, they turned any remaining soft or forgiving parts of my heart to unyielding concrete. Take 2 was much closer to the original than it was to their sanitized ideal. They started reading from a script and doing the whole clothed cowgirl thing, but again lost control, ripped their clothes off and started rutting like animals. Takes 3 to 5 were serious attempts at getting it right, but ended early when one or the other of them began giggling or went off script. Take 6 was the worst. I don't know if Roger had forgotten to turn off the camera or not, but after an aborted clothed practice, he told Flo he had a surprise for her. He left the room and returned with something he put into the back of the TV in the bedroom. I figured soon enough it was the SD card from the basement camera. Grabbing a remote, Roger must have hit play. I couldn't see the screen as it was flush to the camera, but heard enough of the soundtrack that there was no doubt. To say they both lost control would be a gross understatement. Both their faces took on the same sickening expression that had suffused Flo's face on the original version. After they'd both fallen back on the bed, Flo started berating him. After she'd cleaned up, they wouldn't have time to get the video right before Alice was due home, and from what Roger had told her of Alice's roster, they only had the following morning to get it right. Roger was due home And from what Roger had told them, they'd miss a fine their next attempt. They'd best not take it so hard because they'd been performing for months on a stage, so the mental trick was out of their hands. All this from a woman that was acting distraught to her husband, children, and sister. I almost called off the deal and copied the clip to everyone in Flo's address book before calming down and realizing how that would affect my children. I went looking for Roger, but he'd left town by this point. No, there would be no forgiveness for Flo, and sadly no third broken nose for Roger. I sent all the clips to Mary with a note that if I copped flack from anyone about my treatment of Flo, then I would release all the videos. She must have done a good job. As one after the other, Eric, Patty, and Flo's parents all rang to tell me they understood why my marriage was over. I found out later that Mary had told them all the story and offered to show the clips as evidence. Flo's mother had been the only one to take her up on the offer, having trouble believing the story. Apparently, she threw up halfway through the original clip. Flo didn't fight the divorce after that. Through Mary, I found she'd escaped the toxic atmosphere at her parents' house by renting a small apartment. I didn't try to screw her in the settlement. 24 good years had to count for something, and I didn't want anything to come back and bite me on the back from my kids if and when they finally got around to forgiving their mother. Flo did send me a heartfelt letter apologizing for her behavior and the attempted cover-up. The loneliness she was feeling screamed out of the pages. She begged for forgiveness, but only so she could live with herself. Her begging for me to intercede with her parents, our children, and shared friends on her behalf almost brought me to tears. Almost. I wasn't looking for a replacement just yet, but there was no shortage of single ladies vying for my attention. Ask any middle-aged woman about the supply of eligible, decent-looking men with good morals, and she will paint a grim picture. I'm looking forward to the auditions. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts below, and of course subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. And make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.